The billionaire thought he was being clever when he handed the waitress a blank card and demanded she write his wife's name in real Arabic calligraphy. He didn't know her late grandfather was a master calligrapher from Damascus who had trained her since childhood. In the next 60 seconds, her hands would create something so stunning it left his entire table speechless. Before we continue, please subscribe, like, and comment where you're watching from. Let's go. Her name is Layla. She is 28 years old, works 2 jobs, and spends every spare moment caring for her elderly parents. To the wealthy patrons at the upscale restaurant where she serves, she is invisible, just another immigrant waitress, barely worth a glance. But what they don't know is that Layla carries an ancient inheritance in her hands. A lineage of master calligraphers stretching back centuries in Damascus, where her grandfather was once the most revered practitioner of an art so sacred that UNESCO declared it a treasure of humanity. Arabic calligraphy is not just writing. It is geometry, spirituality, and discipline fused into visual poetry, and Layla had been trained since childhood in its highest forms. Tonight, one arrogant comment was about to expose a hidden world. Layla was 7 years old when she first held a kalam, not a pen you buy at a store. A kalam is a reed, cut and shaped by the calligrapher's own hand, and her grandfather had been cutting them for 70 years. His name was Sheikh Mahmoud al-Dimashqi, and in the old city of Damascus, if you mentioned his name in the presence of scholars or artists, they would bow their heads in reverence. He had spent his life inside a small studio near the Umayyad Mosque, a room that smelled of soot ink and aged paper, where the only sounds were the scratch of reed on parchment and the distant echo of the adhan. Sheikh Mahmoud came from a lineage of calligraphers that stretched back to the Ottoman era, when Damascus was a center of the art form, and the sultans of Istanbul would commission Syrian masters to inscribe the walls of their grandest mosques. His own teacher had studied under the legendary Hamdallah, the calligrapher who revolutionized the Arabic script in the 15th century. And now, living in a modest apartment with his daughter and her 2 children, he had no students left except for a small girl with ink-stained fingers and too much curiosity. Calligraphy is not drawing, he would tell her. It is discipline of the soul. Every letter must be formed with intention. Every curve carries weight. If your heart is agitated, the line will tremble. If your mind is cloudy, the ink will blot. You must become still before you write, and in that stillness, you will find God. Layla did not understand the spiritual depth of those words at 7 years old. She only knew that she loved the way the ink flowed, the way her grandfather's hands moved like a conductor leading an orchestra of letters. He taught her the rules of proportion. Each Arabic letter was measured in dots, the rhomboid point left by the kalam. An alif was 3 dots tall, a nun was 1 dot in diameter. Every stroke had a mathematical relationship to every other stroke. Geometry was the hidden skeleton of beauty. By the age of 12, Layla had mastered thulath, the most elegant and difficult of the cursive scripts. Its tall vertical lines and sweeping curves required not just technical precision, but a kind of breath control her grandfather had learned from Sufi mystics. She could write the name of Allah in a composition so harmonious that her grandfather wept when he saw it. She thought she would spend her life in that studio, becoming a master in her own right. Then the war came. Damascus in 2013 was not the city of her childhood. Shelling devastated neighborhoods. Power outages lasted for days. The smell of smoke replaced the scent of jasmine that had defined her earliest memories. Layla's father, a gentle man who worked as a pharmacist, was killed by a stray mortar while walking home from his shop. She was 14, her brother Sami was 10, and her mother nearly lost her will to live. Sheikh Mahmoud carried on, but his health began to fail. The studio, miraculously untouched by bombs, became a sanctuary not just for art, but for survival. Layla would sit with him for hours, not just learning advanced techniques, but escaping the world outside. He taught her Diwani, the script of Ottoman decrees with its dense, intricate ligatures. He taught her Kufic, the angular ancestor of all Arabic scripts, carved into the earliest mosques of Islam. He told her that calligraphy had survived Mongol invasions, colonial occupations, and the collapse of empires. It would survive this too. But in 2016, a shell landed 2 streets from their home, and her mother made the impossible decision. They had an uncle in Michigan who had immigrated years earlier. He could sponsor them if they could get out. The journey would be dangerous, expensive, and uncertain. They had no guarantee of success, but staying meant more death. Sheikh Mahmoud was too frail to travel. His place was in Damascus, he said, in the city where his ancestors were buried and where his art had flourished for centuries. He gave Layla his finest kalam, cut from a reed harvested on the banks of the Euphrates, and a small leather pouch of soot ink he had made himself. He told her that wherever she went, she carried the tradition within her. The pen was only a tool. The true art lived in her hands. He died 3 months after they left. Layla learned of it through a fragmented phone call from a neighbor, the connection crackling with static and grief. She was in a refugee camp in Turkey at the time, waiting for paperwork that might never come. She had no money, no future, and now no grandfather. All she had was a reed pen, dried ink, and the weight of a 1,000-year tradition pressing against her chest. The journey to America took 2 years. Turkey to Jordan, Jordan to a processing center. Then finally, the call that changed everything. They had been approved for resettlement. Layla, her mother, and Sami arrived in Dearborn, Michigan on a freezing February morning, carrying everything they owned in 3 worn suitcases. America was not what she expected. The work was relentless, and dignity was a luxury they could not afford. Her mother, once a proud schoolteacher in Damascus, took a job cleaning hotel rooms. Sami enrolled in high school, struggling with English but determined to adapt. Layla, at 21, became the primary breadwinner. She worked at a diner during the day and a restaurant in the evenings, sending money to relatives who were still trapped in Syria, paying for her mother's blood pressure medication, saving for Sami's college fund. The calligraphy faded from her daily life. There was no time for art when survival demanded every waking hour. The kalam sat in a box under her bed, next to the ink pouch that had long since dried out. Occasionally she would take them out, hold them, remember her grandfather's hands. But then she would put them away and go back to work. A few years later, Sami graduated with honors and a scholarship to the University of Michigan. He wanted to study engineering, to build the kind of future their parents had dreamed of. Their mother's health stabilized, though she would never fully recover from the loss of her husband and the stress of displacement. Layla looked at her life and felt both pride and exhaustion. She had done what was necessary. She had kept her family alive. Then came the opportunity in New York. An old acquaintance from the Turkish camp had relocated there and told her about a high-end restaurant in Manhattan that was hiring. The pay was better, the tips were extraordinary, and the clientele included celebrities, politicians, and billionaires. It was a chance to earn enough to finally breathe, to maybe one day go back to school herself. She moved to a tiny apartment in Queens, sharing it with 2 other women from the Syrian diaspora. She started at the restaurant as a busser, clearing plates and refilling water glasses. Within a year, she was a waitress on the main floor. The restaurant was called Al Noor, an opulent establishment that specialized in modern interpretations of Levanten cuisine. The walls were adorned with panels of Arabic calligraphy, commissioned from a famous artist in Beirut, their gold leaf gleaming under warm lights. But the clientele rarely noticed the art. They came for the status, the prices, the chance to be seen. Layla moved among them like a ghost, her accent carefully softened, her past never mentioned. She was just the waitress. On the night everything changed, Layla was working a double shift. Her feet ached, her neck was stiff, and her mother had called earlier to say her blood pressure was spiking again. She was worried, distracted, counting the hours until she could go home. The restaurant was fully booked, every table occupied by the kind of people who never looked at the price of a meal. At table 7 sat Richard Harrington, a venture capitalist from Silicon Valley whose net worth hovered around $800 million. He was 56, balding, with the aggressive confidence of a man who had never been told no. Tonight was his 15th wedding anniversary, and he had brought his wife, Elena, a quiet woman in an elegant navy dress who seemed accustomed to being ignored. He had been loud all evening, sending back a bottle of wine for being too warm, demanding a different table because the lighting was unflattering, and making jokes to his dinner companions at the expense of the staff. Layla approached the table to take their dessert order. She could feel the tension radiating from Alina and the barely suppressed smirk on Richard's face. He had been drinking, and drunk billionaires were a hazard she had learned to manage with careful neutrality. She kept her voice steady, her expression pleasant. "And for you, sir?" she asked. Richard leaned back in his chair, looking her up and down with the air of a man searching for entertainment. He noticed the calligraphy panels on the walls, the flowing Arabic script that decorated the menus. He smiled, the kind of smile that always preceded cruelty. "You see this?" he said, gesturing at the walls. "All this fancy writing. My wife loves this stuff. It's our anniversary. I want you to write her name in real Arabic calligraphy, not that printed junk on the menu, the real thing. You can do that, can't you? You're from over there, right?" The condescension dripped from every word. He did not expect her to say yes. Expected her to stammer, to apologize, to confirm his assumption that she was nothing more than a low-skilled immigrant playing dress-up in a nice restaurant. His dinner companions laughed, ready for the show of humiliation. Alina looked mortified. "Richard, please, that's not necessary." No, it's fine," Richard said, waving his hand. He pulled a blank card from his jacket pocket, an anniversary card he had clearly not bothered to write in himself. He slid it across the table toward Layla. "Here, write Alina, in beautiful, real Arabic calligraphy. I'll give you $100 tip if it's good." The restaurant seemed to go quiet. Layla stared at the card, then at Richard's smug face, then at Alina's embarrassed eyes. Something shifted inside her, a door she had kept sealed for years cracking open. She thought of her grandfather, of his hands getting hers, of the smell of soot ink and the sound of the adhan. She picked up the card. "I will need a proper pen," she said quietly. "You have a pen?" Richard blinked. He had expected her to decline, to apologize, to slink away in embarrassment. Instead, the waitress was looking at him with a calm he did not understand. She had asked for a pen, his pen, the one clipped to his jacket pocket, a Mont Blanc worth more than most people's monthly rent. "Give it to her," Alina said quietly, a flicker of something unreadable in her eyes. Richard hesitated, then shrugged, pulling the pen from his pocket and handing it over. "Fine. Show us what you've got." Layla took the pen and examined it. A Mont Blanc Meisterstück 18-karat gold nib, piston filled with permanent black ink. It was not a kalam, it was not a reed cut by a master's hand, but it was a precision instrument, and she had learned long ago that the tool matters less than the hand that holds it. Her grandfather used to say that a true calligrapher could write with a stick dipped in mud and still produce beauty. The art was inside, not outside. She laid the anniversary card flat on the table. The blank cream surface seemed to glow under the restaurant's ambient light. She did not sit, but she leaned forward, her posture shifting. The stiffness in her neck faded. The exhaustion in her feet disappeared. Her breathing slowed, deepened. Richard's dinner companions exchanged amused glances. One of them, a venture partner named Marcus, pulled out his phone and began recording. "This ought to be good," he muttered. Layla did not hear him. She was no longer in the restaurant. She was 7 years old again, standing beside her grandfather's workbench, the scent of soot ink filling her lungs, the sound of Damascus outside the window. She could hear his voice, low and rhythmic, as constant as prayer. "The first stroke sets the soul of the piece. You must enter the letter with intention. You must know where it begins and where it ends before the ink touches the surface. Writing is an act of faith." She uncapped the pen, tested the nib on a corner of the cocktail napkin. The ink flowed smoothly, a good sign. Then she positioned the card, angled it precisely, and began. Her first movement was an aleph, the vertical stroke that is the root of all Arabic letters. It should be straight as a minaret, its height exactly 7 widths in the thuluth proportion. Her hand traced it with a steadiness that seemed inhuman, the line sharp and clean. The restaurant's ambient noise faded into a distant hum. The people at the surrounding tables, sensing something unusual, turned to watch. She moved into the ha, the flowing curve that connects to the aleph with a graceful bridge. Her wrist rotated with an economy of motion that only decades of practice could produce. Not practice in the casual sense. The kind of practice her grandfather had demanded. 4 hours a day until the hand forgot it was a hand and became an extension of the divine. She had not done this in years, but the muscle memory was there, dormant and patient, waiting to be awakened. Alina's name in Arabic is composed of 5 letters. Aleph, lam, ya, noon, and the tar marbuta that feminizes the word, binding it closed like a ribbon. As Layla wrote, she was not merely spelling a name. She was constructing a visual poem. The letters interlocked in ways that Western eyes could not immediately decode. The Aleph rose tall, the lam wrapped around it protectively, the ya swept beneath like a river, the noon curved into a crescent, and the final tar sat perched like a jewel atop the composition. She added flourishes, the intricate knots and spirals of the Diwani tradition, which had been reserved for the decrees of sultans. She added a subtle shadow effect, a technique called tathlith, taught only to the most advanced students. The entire composition took 120 seconds. When she finished, she set the pen down beside the card and straightened up. The table was silent. The video was still recording. Elena reached out and picked up the card with trembling fingers. She had studied art history in college. She had visited the great museums of Europe. She had seen illuminated manuscripts and inscribed mosque walls, and what she held in her hands was as exquisite as any of it. The precision of the lines, the harmony of the proportions. Sheer emotional weight of seeing her name transformed into something sacred. Her eyes filled with tears. "Richard," she whispered, "look at this." Richard took the card, his expression shifting from smug expectation to confusion to something approaching awe. He had commissioned art before. He had paid hundreds of thousands of dollars for paintings that hung on his walls. This was a piece of card stock from his own jacket pocket, and yet it radiated a quality he could not articulate. It was not pretty. "It was perfect. How did you?" he began, but the question died on his lips. Marcus lowered his phone, his smirk vanished. "That's insane," he said. "You need to post this. This is going to blow up." He meant it as a compliment. He was a venture capitalist who saw virality as a currency. He had no idea what he was setting in motion. The restaurant manager, a sharp-eyed Lebanese woman named Nadia, had been watching from the host stand. She had seen the condescension on Richard's face, the embarrassment on Elena's, and she had been prepared to intervene if the situation escalated. But she had not expected this. Nadia had grown up in Beirut, the daughter of a calligrapher who had trained at the same school in Damascus where Sheikh Mahmoud had once taught. She recognized the technique. She recognized the lineage. She walked over to the table, her heels clicking on the marble floor. "Layla," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Where did you learn to write like that?" Layla looked at her manager, and for the first time since arriving in America, she allowed herself to speak the truth. "My grandfather was Sheikh Mahmoud al-Dimashqi. He was a master of the Ottoman school. He taught me from the age of 7 until the day I left Syria." Nadia's face went pale. "Sheikh Mahmoud, I have seen his work. It hangs in the National Museum of Beirut. He was one of the greatest calligraphers of the 20th century." The words landed like stones in still water. Richard heard them, Elena heard them, the dinner companions heard them, and Marcus's phone, which was still recording, captured every syllable. The video went online 30 minutes later. Marcus posted it to his Twitter account with the caption, "Billionaire friend mocks waitress, asks her to write wife's name in Arabic. Turns out her grandfather was a legendary calligrapher. The result is stunning." He tagged a few art influencers, a couple of media outlets, and his 20,000 followers. By the time Layla's shift ended at 11 o'clock, the video had been viewed 300,000 times. By midnight, it had crossed 1 million. She woke the next morning to a phone that would not stop buzzing. Her roommate, a Syrian journalist named Hala, was already scrolling through her own phone with wide eyes. "Layla," she said, "you are everywhere. Al Jazeera called, the New York Times. A gallery in Chelsea wants to know if you have more work to sell." Layla sat up in bed, disoriented. She had worked 2 shifts back to back. She had expected to sleep until noon. She did not understand what was happening. Then she watched the video. She saw her own hands moving across the card, writing in a script she had nearly forgotten she knew how to create. She saw the reaction of Richard's face, the tears in Elena's eyes, the way Nadia's voice trembled when she said the name Sheikh Mahmoud. And she realized that the door she had sealed shut had not just cracked open. It had been blown off its hinges. The comments section was a tidal wave of reaction. Users from across the Arab world recognized the technique, debated whether it was Thulath or Diwani, and shared stories of their own calligrapher grandparents. Western viewers expressed astonishment at the beauty of the script. asking how someone could learn such a skill. A prominent curator from the Metropolitan Museum of Art wrote, "This is museum-quality work. The precision and spiritual depth evident in this brief clip surpasses many pieces in our collection." But it was a comment from an account with the name Ahmed Al-Dimashqi, posted at 3 in the morning New York time, that made Layla's blood run cold. "That is my sister. Our grandfather was Sheikh Mahmoud. She could do this since she was 12 years old. I am so proud of her." It was Sami, her younger brother. He had seen the video in Michigan, and he had not thought to ask her permission before identifying her to the world. The call came an hour later, a number she did not recognize. When she answered, the voice on the other end was crisp, professional, and carried an accent she could not place. "Ms. Hassan, my name is Elif Demir. I represent Dar Al-Kart, the International Institute of Arabic Calligraphy based in Istanbul. We saw the video. We have verified your grandfather's legacy in our archives. Sheikh Mahmoud was one of our most esteemed members before the war separated us. We would like to discuss an opportunity with you." Layla gripped the phone, her mind reeling. "What kind of opportunity?" "Our institute is preparing a major exhibition on the transmission of calligraphic knowledge across generations. We have been searching for a living heir to the Damascus School. We believe you are that heir. We would like to fly you to Istanbul. We would like to give you a platform." The irony was almost too much. A waitress who had abandoned her art for survival, now being summoned by the world's foremost calligraphy institution to represent a tradition she had buried under years of exhaustion and invisibility. But before she could answer, there was another call waiting, and another, and another. The news segment that evening cemented it. A major network ran a 4-minute piece titled "The Hidden Master of Arabic Calligraphy." They interviewed Nadia, the restaurant manager, who spoke tearfully about the moment she realized what she was witnessing. They interviewed Elena Harrington, who had called the network herself, saying she wanted the world to know what had happened. "My husband was wrong to mock her. He knows that now, but what she created. I will keep that card for the rest of my life. It is the most beautiful gift I have ever received." Richard Harrington did not appear on camera. His publicist released a statement saying he had made a generous donation to a Syrian refugee education fund and that he deeply regretted his insensitive remarks. The damage control was predictable, but the internet had already judged him. Memes proliferated. The story became a parable about arrogance and hidden brilliance. But the most significant response came from the Syrian diaspora community, which had been scattered across the globe by a war that had killed 500,000 people and displaced 12 million more. For them, Layla's video was not just a satisfying moment of comeuppance. It was a reminder of what had been lost. The art, the culture, the centuries of civilization that bombs and sieges had tried to erase. Sheikh Mahmoud's name trended in Arabic language social media. Grainy photographs of his old studio surfaced. People who had studied under him or whose parents had studied under him came forward with stories. Layla sat in her tiny Queen's apartment, the kalam still in its box under her bed, and realized she was no longer invisible. She was a symbol, and symbols do not get to stay private. Then came the letter. It arrived 3 days after the video went viral, hand-delivered by a courier in a dark suit. The envelope was thick, cream-colored, sealed with wax. Inside was a single sheet of handmade paper, the kind her grandfather used to import from Fez. The handwriting was flawless Maghrebi script, the letters flowing like dunes in a desert wind. It was from a man named Idris El-Khoury, a reclusive billionaire collector of Islamic art, who lived in a private compound in the Moroccan Atlas Mountains. He owned one of the largest private collections of Arabic calligraphy in the world, including 3 pieces by Sheikh Mahmoud. The letter was brief and direct. "I knew your grandfather. He was a teacher to my own father. Your work honors his memory. I would like to purchase the card you created at the restaurant. I am prepared to offer $100,000 for it. If you have other works, I would be interested in acquiring those as well. Please contact me at your earliest convenience." $100,000 for a piece of card stock she had written on in 2 minutes while standing up, using a borrowed pen. It was more money than she had earned in 3 years of double shifts, but the letter did not only make an offer, it made a demand. "I must also inform you that your sudden fame has attracted the attention of others in the collecting world. Some of them are less scrupulous. There are already forgeries of your grandfather's work appearing on the market. Someone is attempting to sell pieces under his name, claiming they were acquired from his studio before the war. These forgeries are convincing. They may damage his legacy unless someone with authentic knowledge intervenes. Layla read that paragraph twice. Someone was profiting from her grandfather's death. Someone was stealing the art that had survived war and displacement, twisting it into a commodity for wealthy collectors who could not tell the difference between a true masterwork and a clever imitation. And only she, the granddaughter who had spent a decade hiding from her own heritage, had the knowledge to stop them. She thought of her grandfather's hands, weathered but steady, guiding hers across a sheet of parchment. She thought of the day she left Damascus, the kalam in her pocket, the promise she had made to him that she would keep the tradition alive. She had broken that promise. She had buried the art under years of survival, convincing herself that it was a luxury she could not afford. But the art had not died. It had been waiting, and now the world was demanding she reclaim it. She picked up the phone and dialed the number in the letter. The line connected after 2 rings. "Mr. El-Khoury," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "Tell me everything about the forgeries." Idris El-Khoury was not a man who wasted words. He spoke with the precision of someone who had spent decades examining brushwork under magnification, who knew that truth resided in the smallest details. Over the next 40 minutes, he laid out a picture that was far more disturbing than Layla had imagined. The forgeries had appeared approximately 18 months earlier, surfacing in private sales, obscure auction houses, and online marketplaces catering to collectors of Islamic art. At first, they were simple pieces, a single verse from the Quran written in Naskh script, a decorative panel with a common proverb, nothing that would attract serious scrutiny. But over time, the quality improved dramatically. The forger began producing complex compositions in thulath and diwani, the very styles her grandfather had mastered. They bore his signature motifs, the distinctive way he looped the final letter of a word, the subtle gradient effect in his illumination. Collectors who had long admired Sheikh Mahmoud's work began snapping them up, paying tens of thousands of dollars for pieces they believed were lost treasures from his Damascus studio. The problem was that Sheikh Mahmoud had not sold any work after 2013. He had been too ill, too trapped by the siege of the city. Any piece claiming to be from the final years of his life was almost certainly fraudulent. And yet the forgeries came with elaborate provenance stories, discovered in a bombed-out building, smuggled across the border by a family fleeing the war, authenticated by a dealer in Beirut who had since disappeared. The stories were tragic, plausible, and almost impossible to verify. "Who is authenticating them?" Layla asked. "A man named Tariq Olwen," El-Khoury said. "He operates out of Istanbul. He claims to have been a student of your grandfather's, and he provides certificates of authenticity for every piece he brokers. I have investigated him. He did indeed study with Sheikh Mahmoud briefly in the early 2000s, but he was never a master. He was dismissed from your grandfather's tutelage for dishonesty. He was caught selling amateur work under another student's name. The name landed like a punch. Tariq Olwen. Layla remembered him. He was older than her, maybe 25 when she was 10. He had come to the studio with grand ambitions, wanting to learn the secrets of the highest forms. Her grandfather had given him a chance, as he gave everyone. But Tariq was impatient. He wanted fame, recognition, money. When Sheikh Mahmoud caught him forging a minor piece and trying to pass it off as authentic, he had sent him away with a warning. The art would never open its heart to those who sought only profit. Now he was in Istanbul selling fakes, using her grandfather's name as currency. "Why hasn't anyone stopped him?" Layla said. "Because the art world is fragmented and exhausted," El-Khoury replied. "The war scattered the authenticators. Museums are underfunded. Collectors are too eager to believe they have found a treasure to question provenance. And Tariq Olwen is clever. His forgeries are not crude imitations. They are skilled enough to fool anyone who is not a master. I only became certain because I have 3 of your grandfather's genuine works. The ink composition was slightly different. A spectrographic analysis revealed modern pigments mixed with traditional soot. That was the smoking gun." Layla sat in silence, absorbing the betrayal. A former student was defiling her grandfather's memory, exploiting the destruction of their homeland for profit. And the world was so hungry for authentic Syrian art that it was swallowing the lies without question. "I cannot let this continue," she said. "That is why I contacted you," El-Khoury replied. "You are the only living expert who can definitively identify his late work. You know his hand better than anyone. And now, thanks to the video, you have a platform. The Institute in Istanbul wants to meet you. Tarek Olwen will know you are coming. He will be afraid. A frightened forger makes mistakes. I am offering to fund your travel, provide legal support, and introduce you to the right people in the Turkish art scene. If we can expose him, we can recover your grandfather's legacy." The next morning, Layla called Dar Alkart and accepted their invitation. She also called her mother in Dearborn. Her mother's voice trembled with a mixture of pride and fear. She had never spoken of Sheikh Mahmoud after his death, as if the grief was a wound that could not be touched. Now she gave her daughter a simple instruction. "Your grandfather believed you were his greatest student. He told me so many times. Go to Istanbul, do what he would have done." Layla packed the kalam and a small bag of clothes. She said goodbye to her roommates, who promised to cover her shifts at the restaurant. She boarded a Turkish Airlines flight at JFK, her heart pounding with the weight of a mission she had never asked for but could not refuse. Istanbul was a city that lived between worlds, Europe on one side, Asia on the other, the Bosphorus stitching them together with a thread of blue. The Dar Alkart Institute occupied a restored Ottoman mansion in the Fatih district, a neighborhood of narrow cobblestone streets and ancient mosques where the call to prayer echoed 5 times a day. When Layla walked through its doors, she entered a sanctuary dedicated to the art her grandfather had devoted his life to. The walls were covered with masterworks spanning 6 centuries, Kufic inscriptions from the Abbasid era, Thuluth panels from the golden age of the Ottomans, contemporary pieces that pushed the boundaries of the form. The director, Elif Demir, was a woman of about 50 with silver-streaked hair and eyes that missed nothing. She greeted Layla with formal warmth, but there was a tension beneath the surface. She had seen the video, she knew the story, and she knew about the forgeries. "You are not the only person who has reached out to us about Tarek Olwen," she said, getting Layla into a private office. "2 other collectors have reported suspicions, but they lack proof. If we move against him without evidence, he will sue us for defamation. He has contacts in the government. He has positioned himself as a defender of Syrian cultural heritage. It is a clever disguise." "What kind of evidence do you need?" Layla asked. "Forensic proof. A piece he is currently selling that we can demonstrate is a forgery through expert analysis. We have acquired one such piece through a third-party buyer. I was hoping you would examine it." Elif led her to a conservation lab on the 2nd floor. On a sterile table, under a magnifying lamp, lay a framed composition. It was a verse from Surah Ar-Rahman, written in a Thuluth script that, at first glance, looked exactly like Sheikh Mahmoud's hand. The loops, the proportions, the subtle layering of ink and gold leaf. It was beautiful and it was wrong. Layla's breath caught. She leaned closer, studying the piece with the same intensity her grandfather had demanded of her as a child. She traced the letters with her eyes, measuring the spacing, the thickness of the strokes, the way the ink had bled microscopically into the paper. And there it was. A tiny detail that no forger could perfectly replicate unless they had spent decades under her grandfather's direct instruction. When Sheikh Mahmoud wrote the letter meme, the final circular letter that often closed a word, he would always, without exception, leave a nearly invisible gap between the descending tail and the body of the letter. It was not a flaw. It was a signature. He called it the breath mark. "A letter must breathe," he would say. "Even in the densest composition, there must be space for the soul to enter." This meme was sealed. The tail touched the body. The breath mark was absent. "It is a forgery," Layla said quietly. "A very good one, but not my grandfather's work." Elif's expression hardened. "Then we have what we need. Will you testify to this before our board and, if necessary, in a court of law?" Layla nodded, but there was something else gnawing at her. If Tarek had dismissed from the studio in the early 2000s, he had only learned the basics. This forgery was too skilled. The understanding of proportion, the confidence of the hand, the near-perfect mimicry. It suggested a level of training that Tarek should not have possessed. "Who else could it be?" Layla asked. Who else studied with my grandfather long enough to reach this level? Elif hesitated. There were many students over the decades, but after the war, most of them scattered. Some are dead, some are in refugee camps, some have abandoned the art entirely. Tariq Olwin is the only one who has emerged as a dealer of questionable materials, but if he has a partner, someone who is actually producing the work while he handles the sales, we have not identified them. The hunt was now broader and more dangerous. Layla needed to find not just the seller, but the artist, and she had an idea of where to start looking. The next day, she visited the Grand Bazaar. Beneath its vaulted ceilings, a labyrinth of shops sold everything from carpets to ceramics, but there was a hidden corner, a narrow lane called the Street of the Scribes, where calligraphers had worked for centuries. Some of them were legitimate artists, others were forgers, operating in the shadows of a market that rarely asked questions. Layla had heard stories from her grandfather about this place. He had once come here as a young man, seeking rare pigments, and he had been offered a job forging Ottoman decrees. He had refused, but he had learned how the underground trade operated. She walked the street, her scarf pulled low, her eyes scanning the shops. She did not know exactly what she was looking for until she saw a small sign, Olwin Fine Arts, Authentic Syrian Calligraphy, Buy and Sell. The shop was tucked between a spice merchant and a jeweler, its window displaying a selection of framed works. Among them was a piece that made Layla's heart stop. It was a panel she had seen before, not in a museum, but in her grandfather's studio. It was a practice composition, a study of the word Allah in the style of the great Ottoman master Hamdallah. He had made it to demonstrate a technique to her when she was 11 years old. She had watched him write it. She had watched him discard it, dissatisfied with the curve of the final ha. He had thrown it into the scrap bin, and now it was here, framed and priced at 25,000 euros. She entered the shop. A young man at the counter looked up, his face momentarily blank before recognition dawned. He had seen the video. Everyone had seen the video. "Ms. Hassan," he said, his voice wavering. "What an honor. What can I want to speak to Tariq Olwin," she said. "Now." Tariq emerged from a back room a minute later. He was 46 now, heavier than she remembered, his beard neatly trimmed, his suit expensive. His eyes, when they met hers, held a complicated mixture of fear and defiance. He knew why she was there. "Layla," he said, spreading his hands in a gesture of false welcome. "Your grandfather's favorite student. I heard you were in Istanbul. Please let me offer you tea." "I did not come for tea. I came for an explanation." She pointed at the panel. "That piece is my grandfather's, but he did not sell it to you. He threw it away, so how is it here?" Tariq's mask slipped for a fraction of a second. Then he recovered, smiling thinly. "You are mistaken. I acquired this piece from a collector in Beirut who purchased it directly from Sheikh Mahmoud in 2012. I have the paperwork. Everything I sell is authentic. Your paperwork is worthless. I can prove it, and I am going to." The threat hung in the air. Tariq's smile faded. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You do not understand what you are walking into. The people I work with are not patient men. They have invested a great deal in this business. If you interfere, there will be consequences." "Is that a threat?" "It is a warning. Go back to New York. Go back to waiting tables. This world is too dangerous for someone like you." Layla looked at him, this man who had once sat at her grandfather's feet and absorbed his wisdom, only to twist it into something corrupt. She felt no fear, only a cold, steady anger that reminded her of her grandfather's voice. The true artist does not bend to corruption. The true artist fights. "I am not going anywhere," she said, and walked out. That night, she returned to her hotel to find a message waiting. It was from an unknown number. The text was short. "The forger you are looking for is not Tariq. He is a front. The real artist is someone you know. Meet me at the Suleymaniye Mosque tomorrow at dawn. Come alone." Layla did not sleep. She sat by the window, watching the lights of Istanbul glitter across the Bosphorus, the kalam in her hand. She had brought it as a reminder of her purpose, but also as a talisman. If the message was a trap, she would walk into it anyway. She had come too far to turn back now. Dawn broke over the city, painting the minarets in shades of rose and gold. Layla made her way to the Suleymaniye Mosque, one of the masterpieces of Ottoman architecture, its courtyard silent except for the cooing of pigeons. A figure stood near the fountain, cloaked in a dark coat, their face obscured by a hood. As Layla approached, the figure turned. The hood fell back, and she found herself staring at a ghost. It was Omar al-Sail, her grandfather's most brilliant student before the war. He had disappeared in 2015, presumed dead in a bombing that had leveled his neighborhood in Aleppo. The family had mourned him. Layla had wept for him, and he was standing in front of her alive, his face scarred, his eyes hollow. "Hello, Layla," he said. "I am so sorry you had to find out this way, but I am the one who has been forging your grandfather's work, and I need your help to stop." It took Layla a moment to find her voice. The last time she had seen Omar al-Sail, he was a young man of 23, full of fire and ambition, his hands capable of producing lines so elegant that Sheikh Mahmoud had once declared him the natural heir to the Damascus tradition. She had mourned him. She had placed his name among the dead, another casualty of a war that consumed everything. And now he was standing before her, scarred but alive, confessing to a crime that had tarnished her grandfather's memory. "Why?" she finally asked. "Why would you do this?" Omar lowered himself onto the cold stone bench near the fountain. His shoulders sagged with a weight that seemed to press him into the ground. "Because Tariq has my son." The words hung in the dawn air, terrible and absolute. Omar's son Malik was born in 2014, just months before the bombing that had destroyed their home in Aleppo. Omar had been injured, left for dead in the rubble, and when he woke in a hospital in Turkey, he found that his wife had not survived. But Malik had. The boy, barely 2 years old, had been pulled from the wreckage by a neighbor and brought across the border. Tariq Olwen had found them first. "I was broken," Omar said. "I could not work, I could not provide." Tariq offered to take Malik in to pay for his care. He said he only needed a small favor in return, a few pieces in your grandfather's style. He said they were for private collectors who would never resell them. I was desperate. I said yes. The small favor had expanded, as Tariq's favors always did. Within a year, Omar was producing forgeries full-time, locked in a studio apartment in a rundown district of Istanbul. His son held in a separate location that he was allowed to visit only when Tariq was satisfied with his output. The pieces were sold across the world, their provenance fabricated, their authenticity falsely certified. Tariq grew wealthy, Omar grew hollow. "I tried to stop," Omar said, his voice cracking. "Last year I told Tariq I would not make any more. He said if I refused, he would have Malik sent back to Syria, to the camps. I would never see him again, so I continued." Layla listened, and the anger she had felt toward Omar began to redirect itself toward its proper target. Tariq Olwen was not just a forger. He was a kidnapper, a trafficker, a man who had weaponized a father's love against the very tradition he claimed to protect. The art her grandfather had taught was being used as a chain to bind his most gifted student. This was not greed, this was enslavement. "Where is Malik now?" Layla asked. "Tariq keeps him in a house in the Balat district. I am allowed to visit every Sunday for 2 hours. The rest of the time I am watched. I cannot go to the police because Tariq has connections. He has bribed officials. He has made sure that any complaint I file will be dismissed and that Malik will disappear before anyone can find him." Layla's mind raced. They needed proof, they needed leverage, and they needed to act before Tariq realized that Omar had made contact with her. He already suspected she was a threat. The meeting at the shop had confirmed it. If he discovered that Omar had told her the truth, Malik would be moved, perhaps permanently. "We need to document everything," she said. "The studio, the forgeries, the receipts, the communications. Do you have anything that proves the connection between Tariq and Malik's captivity?" Omar reached into his coat and produced a worn envelope. Inside were photographs. Malik, a bright-eyed boy of 9 now, standing beside a woman Layla did not recognize. Payment records in Tariq's handwriting. A flash drive containing emails and text messages that detailed the arrangement, including threats. Omar had been collecting evidence for months, waiting for an opportunity, a person he could trust. "Your grandfather told me once that if I was ever in trouble, I should find you," Omar said. "He said you had a strength that would outlast any darkness. I did not know if you were alive. Then I saw the video." The sun was fully up now, the mosque courtyard filling with the first worshippers of the day. Layla folded the envelope and tucked it into her bag. She had a phone call to make. Elif Demir was waiting at the institute when Layla arrived with Omar. The director listened to the full story, her expression darkening with every detail. She had suspected Tariq of fraud. She had not suspected kidnapping. The evidence Omar provided was damning. Bank records showing payments from Tariq to the property owner of the house where Malik was held, emails in which Tariq explicitly threatened to deport the boy if Omar stopped producing forgeries, photographs of the studio where the forgeries were made, with Tariq's fingerprints all over the supply chain. "We need to involve the authorities," Elif said, "but through channels Tariq has not corrupted. I know a prosecutor in the Cultural Crimes Division who has been investigating art fraud for years. She has been trying to build a case against Tariq but lacked direct evidence. With this, she can act." The next 48 hours moved with the precision of a military operation. The prosecutor, a formidable woman named Ice Karaman, obtained warrants for Tariq's shop, his warehouse, and the house in Balat. She coordinated with Child Protective Services to ensure Malik would be immediately taken into safe custody. She froze Tariq's accounts, preventing him from fleeing the country, and she asked Layla to do something that only she could do: authenticate every piece in Tariq's inventory, separating the genuine works from the forgeries so that the full scale of the fraud could be documented. Layla spent 2 days in a warehouse filled with hundreds of framed pieces, each one claiming to be the work of Sheikh Mahmoud al-Dimashqi. She examined them one by one, using the knowledge her grandfather had given her: the breath mark in the meme, the precise angle of the aleph, the ink composition, which she tested with a small bottle of reagent that El-Khoury had provided. The genuine works she set aside, a small pile of perhaps 20 pieces that her grandfather had actually created. The rest, more than 200 items, were forgeries. Among the genuine works, she found something unexpected: a letter handwritten by her grandfather dated 2 months before his death. It was addressed to her, though it had never been sent. "To my dear Layla," it read, "if you are reading this, then my time has ended and you have found your way back to the art. I knew this day would come. The kalam I gave you is not just a tool, it is a key. Use it to unlock the beauty that still exists in this broken world. And remember, the truest calligraphy is not written on paper, it is written on the hearts of those we love." She folded the letter and held it against her chest. Her grandfather had known she would return, he had prepared for it, and now through her, his legacy would be reclaimed. The raid on the Balat house occurred at dawn, exactly 1 week after Layla had arrived in Istanbul. Ice Karaman led the operation personally. Tariq Olwen was arrested at his shop simultaneously, the evidence so overwhelming that his lawyer reportedly advised him to plead guilty and cooperate. Malik was found in a comfortable but heavily guarded apartment, cared for by a woman who turned out to be Tariq's sister. She had been paid to watch the boy, but claimed she knew nothing of the extortion. The authorities were skeptical. When Malik was brought to the institute, Omar fell to his knees and wept. The boy, confused but unharmed, wrapped his arms around his father's neck. It was the first time they had been together without supervision in 4 years. Layla watched from across the room, tears streaming down her own face. Her grandfather's art had been twisted into a weapon of cruelty, but it had also become the instrument of liberation. The same knowledge that exposed the forgeries had freed an innocent child. The trial of Tariq Olwen lasted 6 months and made international headlines. Major media outlets covered the story, connecting it to the viral video that had started everything. The waitress who had been mocked in a restaurant had not only demonstrated hidden genius, she had unraveled a criminal enterprise that spanned continents. Richard Harrington, the billionaire whose condescension had set the whole chain in motion, released a second statement, this time acknowledging that his behavior had been disgraceful and announcing a $5 million donation to the Dar al-Khat Institute to support the preservation of Syrian cultural heritage. Whether it was genuine remorse or PR strategy, the money was real. Tariq was convicted of art fraud, kidnapping, and human trafficking. He was sentenced to 22 years in prison. The forgeries were confiscated and, in a symbolic act, publicly destroyed, except for a few that were preserved as educational examples of forensic art analysis. The genuine works of Sheikh Mahmoud were returned to the Institute, where they became the centerpiece of a new exhibition titled The Breath of Damascus. For Omar, the resolution was bittersweet. He had created the forgeries, and though he had done so under duress, he still felt the shame of having betrayed his teacher's legacy. Layla refused to let him drown in guilt. "My grandfather would not have blamed you for trying to save your son," she told him. "He believed that art exists to serve life. You used your art to protect a child. That is not betrayal, that is love." The institute offered Omar a position as a conservator and teacher on the condition that he never again produce work for the commercial market without independent authentication. He agreed. He began teaching young students, many of them refugees like himself, passing on the techniques that Sheikh Mahmoud had taught him. Malik enrolled in a local school and showed an early aptitude for drawing. His father did not push him toward calligraphy, but the boy asked to learn. The tradition would continue. And then came the final revealing surprise, the detail that would change Layla's understanding of everything. 3 months after the trial, Elif Demir called Layla into her office. She had been reviewing the Institute's archives, cross-referencing the timeline of the forgeries with correspondence from Sheikh Mahmoud's final years. And she had found something that no one had noticed before, a series of letters between Layla's grandfather and Tariq Alwan, written between 2013 and 2016, during the period when Tariq was supposedly no longer in contact with him. The letters were cordial, respectful. Tariq had been asking for advice on authentication techniques, claiming he wanted to help preserve Syrian art from the war. Sheikh Mahmoud had responded with detailed guidance, unaware that his former student was using the information to perfect his forgeries. But the final letter, dated just weeks before the old master's death, contained a passage that made Layla's heart stop. "Tariq, I know what you are doing," Sheikh Mahmoud had written. "I have heard from travelers that my work is appearing on the market, pieces I did not create. I suspect Omar is involved, though I hope I am wrong. If he is, it can only be because you have something over him. I have made arrangements. If my granddaughter Layla ever comes to Istanbul, a package will be delivered to her at the Dar al-Khat Institute. It contains everything she will need to stop you. I have known you since you were a young man. I have forgiven you many things. But if you have harmed my students or their families, you will find that even from the grave, a teacher's reach is long." The letter had never been sent. It had been found among her grandfather's papers after his death, filed away by a neighbor who did not recognize its significance. It had taken years for the archive to reach the institute. "And the package?" Layla asked. Elif led her to a storage room and unlocked a cabinet. Inside was a wooden box, carefully sealed. When Layla opened it, she found not just documents, but something far more precious: her grandfather's personal journal, filled with notes on every student he had ever taught, including their unique stylistic signatures. He had anticipated the possibility of forgeries and had created a key that only his granddaughter would fully understand. The journal was the reason Tariq's operation could never have succeeded indefinitely. It was a trap laid years in advance, waiting for the right person to spring it. Layla held the journal in her hands, the weight of her grandfather's foresight pressing against her palms. He had not just trained her in calligraphy, he had trained her for this moment. Every lesson, every correction, every story about the ethics of the art had been preparation for a battle he knew she would one day face. She realized then that her gift was not just a skill, it was a responsibility. And she was finally ready to carry it. The exhibition, The Breath of Damascus, opened 6 months later to international acclaim. At its center were the genuine works of Sheikh Mahmoud al-Dimashqi, including the letter he had written to Layla. Visitors came from across the world to see the art of a master whose legacy had nearly been stolen. But the most talked about piece in the exhibition was not her grandfather's. It was a new work created by Layla herself. She had spent weeks composing it, using her grandfather's kalam and ink she had made herself from soot and gum Arabic, following the traditional recipe he had taught her. The composition was a verse from the Quran, "And we have not sent you except as a mercy to the worlds." She wrote it in Thuluth script, with illuminations in gold leaf, and she included the breath mark in every meme. It was her first public work, and it was a masterwork. Critics called it a revelation. Collectors offered to buy it for sums that would have paid off her family's debts, and then some, but Layla did not sell it. She donated it to the Institute with a condition: it would be displayed permanently, free to the public, as a reminder that art survives war, displacement, and betrayal, that the hands of a refugee waitress could carry the weight of centuries. On the night of the opening, Layla stood before her piece, surrounded by dignitaries and journalists, and she spoke the words she had been waiting her whole life to say. "My grandfather taught me that calligraphy is the geometry of the soul. Every letter is a map. Every composition is a journey. Tonight I am home, and I am just beginning." She raised her kalam, the same reed pen he had given her on the day she left Damascus, and the audience understood. The waitress had not just revealed a hidden talent, she had reclaimed an entire lineage, and her story was only getting started. The story of Layla Hassan is not really about a single moment in a restaurant. That moment was a spark. The story is about what happens when a tradition that has survived 14 centuries of empires, wars, and erasure is placed into the hands of someone who refused to let it die. Arabic calligraphy was recognized by UNESCO as an intangible cultural heritage of humanity for a reason. It is not merely writing. It is a vessel for identity, a repository of spiritual discipline, a bridge between past and future, and it almost disappeared under the rubble of a war that scattered its masters across the globe. Layla could have remained invisible. She had every reason to bury her gift. Exhaustion, grief, the daily struggle of survival in a country that asked nothing of her except her labor. But the gift would not stay buried. It emerged through a borrowed Montblanc pen in the hand of a woman who had been trained since childhood to turn letters into light. That is the thing about true mastery. It does not announce itself. It waits. And when the moment comes, it speaks with a voice that silences every doubter in the room. The billionaire who mocked her learned a lesson that money cannot buy. The forger who exploited her grandfather's legacy is now in prison. The lost student who became a forger under duress is now a teacher himself, his son safe, his hands once again creating beauty instead of counterfeits. The institute in Istanbul has a new generation of students, many of them refugees, learning that their heritage is not a burden but a birthright. And the restaurant card, that simple piece of card stock with Alina's name written in Thuluth script, now hangs in a museum in Marrakesh, donated by Alina herself as a permanent reminder that art can emerge from the most unlikely circumstances. But the question that lingers is this: how many other Laylas are out there? How many invisible people carry within them the knowledge of a tradition that the world has forgotten to value? The United Nations estimates that there are over 35 million refugees in the world today. Among them are master musicians, poets, calligraphers, weavers, healers, people whose skills were passed down through generations, preserved against all odds, and then hidden beneath the fluorescent lights of restaurant kitchens and hotel laundry rooms. They are not seen, they are not asked, and their gifts are slowly fading, not from lack of talent, but from lack of opportunity. Layla's story went viral because it contained a satisfying reversal. The arrogant billionaire, the humble waitress, the stunning reveal, but the deeper resonance is something quieter. It is the recognition that dignity does not depend on status, that excellence can reside in the hands of someone you have been trained not to look at, and that sometimes the greatest art in the world is being made not in studios or galleries, but in cramped apartments by people who are just trying to survive. Layla still lives in Queens. She still sends money to her mother in Dearborn. She still works, though now at the institute rather than the restaurant. She teaches calligraphy to children who speak Arabic with accents flavored by every country that has taken in the Syrian diaspora. She tells them the same thing her grandfather told her, that the kalam is a key, that stillness is the beginning of mastery, that every letter must breathe. She is no longer invisible, and neither are they. If this story moved you, let it move you to action. Look around at the people you do not see. Ask questions. Listen to answers. You may discover a hidden world. Please like this video, share it with someone who needs to be reminded that talent is everywhere, and subscribe to our channel for more stories of courage, transformation, and the art that refuses to die. We release new documentaries every week, and we would love to have you with us. Comment below, what is a skill or tradition that has been passed down in your family? We read every response. Thank you for watching, and remember, the most valuable things in this world are not the ones you can buy. They are the ones that are hidden in plain sight, waiting for someone to ask. Until next time.